Sometimes I cover cases where the motive is a complete mystery, where we're left wondering why someone would do something so horrific. But other times, the motive is crystal clear. We can trace the path that led to violence. We can see exactly how someone went from law-abiding citizen to killer. And those cases in some ways are even more disturbing because they show us just how thin the line can be between keeping it together and completely falling apart. Let me tell you about Arunya Rouch. Picture a hot Florida courtroom. Arunya is sitting beside her defense attorney, stiff as a board, her face completely blank. The trial proceedings are ending, and even though she's not showing a single hint of emotion on the outside, you can bet that deep inside she's full of anxiety. This looked like a straightforward case. Open and shut. Most people figured the jury would come back with a verdict in 30 minutes, maybe an hour tops. But that's not what happened. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. 7 hours to decide what seemed obvious to everyone watching. Finally, they turned their verdict over to the judge. He read the decision written on that little piece of paper, then turned to face Arunya. She continued to maintain her composure, didn't react at all when the judge sentenced her to life in prison. But to understand how Arunya ended up in that courtroom, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to Thailand, where Arunya's story really starts. Arunya was born in Thailand and grew up in absolute poverty. The kind of poverty where you don't have opportunities, where your future is limited by circumstances beyond your control. But Arunya wanted more for herself. She refused to accept that poverty was going to define her entire life. So she made a decision that took tremendous courage. She packed up everything she owned and moved to the United States. She was looking for a better life, for opportunities that didn't exist back home. She even applied for American citizenship, and eventually, she was granted it. This was the American dream playing out in real time. An immigrant coming to this country with nothing, determined to build something better. Arunya settled into her new life. She got married to a man named Tom, and they both started working at Publix, an employee-owned grocery store chain. Arunya worked at the location in Tarpon Springs, while her husband Tom worked at a different store. Tom was a trainer for the company with the specialized job of opening seafood departments in new locations. Now I want you to understand something about Arunya's work ethic, because it's important to what happens next. Arunya was a dedicated employee. She took tremendous pride in her work. She enjoyed making her department neat and clean, presentable for customers. She wanted everything to be just perfect. And that dedication meant that sometimes Arunya would arrive at work a little bit earlier than her scheduled shift, just so she could spend that extra time making sure her area looked exactly right. Now, technically, this was against store policy. You're not supposed to start working before you clock in. But Arunya didn't take that policy very seriously. To her, those few extra minutes weren't about getting extra hours or gaming the system. They were about pride in her work. Most people would see that kind of dedication as a positive trait, right? Someone who cares so much about their job that they voluntarily come in early to make sure everything's perfect. But there was one person who worked at the Publix store with Arunya who didn't see it that way at all. His name was Gregory Janowski. March 30th, 2010 was one of those days when Arunya arrived at work early. She was doing her usual routine, getting her area ready, making sure everything was in order. The problem was that Gregory saw her working before her shift officially started, and he decided he was going to do something about it this time. He walked up to Arunya and told her he was going to report her for violating company policy. That was the last straw for Arunya. She whipped around and looked him dead in the eye, saying something along the lines of, "If you mess with my work, I will kill you." Now, you might be wondering why Arunya reacted so strongly to what seems like a relatively minor issue. But here's the thing. Gregory had been a problem for Arunya for as long as she could remember. He was a bully, and he absolutely loved to bully Arunya. He was constantly saying things to her like, "Get back in your hole," meaning, get back to your own department. He constantly picked on her, criticized her work, made her feel small and worthless. Gregory had bullied Arunya so relentlessly that she would go home after work and spend hours crying. She became depressed. She told her husband that she was mentally sick from it all. She couldn't understand why Gregory wouldn't just leave her alone. Arunya's husband Tom had even confronted Gregory in the past, asking him to please stop bullying his wife. And you know what Gregory did? He laughed at Tom and walked away. Think about that. A woman is being harassed so badly at work that her husband feels the need to step in and ask the bully to stop, and the bully just laughs in his face. And then the worst thing that could have happened to Arunya finally happened. She was fired from her job at Publix. The reason? Gregory had reported her for violating company policy by working before clocking in. Then he filed a complaint claiming that Arunya had threatened him. Arunya couldn't believe this was happening. The work she cared so much about, the job she'd taken such pride in, the department she'd made spotless and perfect, it was all being taken away from her. And it was all because of Gregory Janowski. She was in a daze as she gathered her belongings from her locker. Then she left the Publix store, completely devastated and burning with anger toward Gregory and the management who had sided with him. When Arunya got home, she wasn't doing well at all. Her mind was in a blur, like she was moving through fog. And it was in this state of mind that she went to where her husband stored their 9mm handgun. She took it out of its case, placed it in her bag, got in her car, and headed back to the Publix store. As soon as she pulled into the parking lot, she saw what she was looking for. Arunya got out of her car and walked straight toward another vehicle parked in the lot. Gregory was sitting in his car, probably on a break or getting ready to leave for the day. He didn't see it coming when he looked out his window and found himself staring into the face of Arunya Rouch. Without any hesitation, Arunya pulled the 9mm handgun out of her bag, pointed it at Gregory through the car window, and pulled the trigger. She shot him point blank, killing him instantly. Gregory slumped forward in his seat, dead. But Arunya wasn't finished. She turned and ran inside the Publix store. She didn't waste any time. She headed straight for the manager's office upstairs. She was going to make them pay for the way they'd disgraced her, for siding with Gregory, for taking away the job she'd loved so much. Arunya reached the office and walked in, ready to shoot everyone in the room. But to her disappointment, the room was empty. By this time, there was mass panic throughout the Publix store. Shoppers had seen Arunya walking through the aisles with a gun. People outside had witnessed her shoot Gregory in his car. The store was in absolute chaos as customers screamed, dropped their groceries, and fled for their lives. A witness to the shooting had already called the police, and within minutes, officers arrived at the store. When Arunya saw the police, she raised her gun and fired at them. The officers had no choice. They returned fire, shooting Arunya, and finally bringing an end to the chaos inside the Publix store. Police rushed Arunya to Bayfront Medical Center for treatment. Despite her injuries, they were able to stabilize her, and she ultimately survived. When the case went to trial, Arunya's defense team tried to claim temporary insanity triggered by the relentless bullying and the sudden loss of her job. But Arunya didn't have any history of mental illness. and the prosecution successfully argued that regardless of what Gregory had done to her, regardless of how unfairly she'd been treated, she'd made a calculated choice to go home, get a gun, return to the store, and execute someone. Arunya was found guilty on all counts. 1 count of first-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and 2 counts of aggravated assault. And that brings us back to that hot Florida courtroom where Arunya sat stone-faced as the judge sentenced her to life in prison. You know what makes this case so tragic? On some level, I understand Arunya's rage. I'm not justifying what she did, not even close. But I understand the feeling of being bullied relentlessly at work, of having someone make your life miserable day after day, of management doing nothing about it, even when you complain. Gregory was, by all accounts, a workplace bully. He tormented Arunya to the point where she was crying at home, telling her husband she was mentally sick from the harassment. And when she finally snapped and threatened him, he used that threat to get her fired. That's infuriating, that's unjust. But here's the thing, as unfair as it was, as much as Gregory may have deserved to be fired himself for his behavior, he didn't deserve to die. He didn't deserve to be executed in a parking lot because he was a bully at work. And Arunya had other options. She could have filed a lawsuit for workplace harassment. She could have reported the situation to corporate. She could have found another job and moved on with her life. Instead, she chose violence. She chose murder. And in making that choice, she destroyed multiple lives: Gregory's, his family's, the traumatized shoppers and employees who witnessed the shooting, and her own. Arunya came to America looking for a better life. She worked hard, took pride in her job, tried to build something meaningful, and all of that ended in a Publix parking lot on March 30th, 2010. Because she couldn't find a way to deal with a workplace bully that didn't involve a gun. That's the real tragedy here. 2 lives destroyed, 1 ended, 1 imprisoned forever over workplace harassment that should have been handled by HR, not with bullets. Arunya will spend the rest of her life in prison, and Gregory is dead. And for what? Because management at a grocery store didn't take workplace bullying seriously enough to stop it before it escalated to murder. That's what haunts me about this case. It was so preventable if management had stepped in, if they'd taken Arunya's complaints seriously, if they'd addressed Gregory's behavior instead of letting it continue. But they didn't. And now 1 person is dead, and another will never see freedom again.